Scary Reddit stories. Let's go. No wasting time with intros today, we're getting straight into the stories. And we're going to begin with story number 1, which is brought to us from Gamal Frank. And it is titled, "My Dying Mother Promised Her Guardian Angel Would Protect Me. I've seen it now and I don't think it's an angel. My mother died 2 months ago. It wasn't a tragedy in the sudden shocking sense. It was a long, slow, quiet fading cancer. We had years to prepare, but you never really prepared. The last week was spent in a sterile, beige-coloured hospice room that smelled of bleach and quiet finality. I sat by her bed holding a thin, papery hand, just watching her breathe. She was at peace with it. That was the strangest, most difficult part. While I was tangled, screaming not of grief and anticipatory loss, she was serene. On her last day, while her breathing was shallow and her voice was a dry, rustling whisper, she pulled me close. Her eyes, which had been cloudy and distant, were suddenly crystal clear. "Don't be sad, my love," she whispered, a faint, tired smile on her lips. "I'm not afraid. I've never been afraid. He's always been with me." "Who, Mum?" I asked, my voice thick with tears. "My guardian," she said, her gaze shifting to a point just over my shoulder. "My protector. He was a gift from my own mother when she passed. He's kept me safe my whole life. He's never let any real harm come to me." I didn't know what to say. My mother had always been a little spiritual in a vague, non-denominational way. I just assumed it was the morphine talking. A final comforting delusion. I squeezed her hand. "When I go," she continued, her eyes looking back onto mine with a startling intensity, "he will pass on to you. He has to. He needs someone to watch over. You will be safe now. Always." "Mum, don't talk like that," I choked out. "You won't believe me at first," she said, ignoring me, her voice gaining a strange final strength. "But you'll know. There will be 10 marks, 10 signs after I'm gone. When you've seen the 10th, you'll know he's with you, and then you'll see him." She recited the marks to me then, her voice a low, rhythmic chant. A coin returned, a silent bell, a path cleared, a saved fall, a warning unheard, a fear answered, a scent of the old earth, a touch of cold fur, a voice not your own, and finally a gaze returned. She finished, and a deep, peaceful sigh escaped her lips. She closed her eyes, and a few hours later she was gone. The funeral was a blur. The weeks that followed were a suffocating fog of grief and paperwork. I was just going through the motions, a ghost in my own life. I'd completely forgotten her strange final words. They were just the ramblings of a dying woman, a final beautiful, meaningless piece of poetry. Then the first mark appeared. I was at the grocery store, fumbling for my keys in the parking lot, and a quarter slipped through my fingers, clattering onto the dark, wet asphalt. It was late and raining. I looked for a minute, but it was gone, probably rolled under the car. I sighed, wrote it off and drove home. When I got to my apartment and emptied my pockets under the dresser, there it was, sitting right in the centre of the pile of my keys and wallet. A single, dry, gleaming quarter. I stared at must have had another one. I must have picked it up without realizing it. I dismissed it, but a tiny cold seed of unease had been planted. A coin returned. A week later, the second mark. I was walking home from work, taking my usual route past an old, decommissioned church. As I passed its silent stone bell tower, I heard it, a single clear, resonant bong of a great bell, echoing through the quiet afternoon air. I looked up, and the tower was still. The great bell was motionless. No birds flew out. No one else on the street seemed to have noticed. An auditory hallucination, I told myself. Stress and grief do strange things to your mind. A silent bell. The third mark came a few days after that. My work building is old and the maintenance staff is constantly doing repairs. I was heading to the break room, but the hallway was blocked by a huge wheeled cart full of tools and equipment, left there by a worker who was nowhere in sight. I sighed, annoyed, and turned to go the long way around. I got to the end of the hall, turned the corner, then realised I'd forgotten my wallet at my desk. I turned back. The hallway was empty. The massive cart had gone. The whole process had taken less than 30 seconds. There was no way anyone could have moved it that fast. It had just vanished. A path cleared. I wasn't just uneasy anymore. I was starting to get scared. These could not be just coincidences. They were too specific, too perfectly aligned with my mother's strange prophecy. I started to feel like I was a character in a story that someone else was writing, and I started to feel like I was being watched. It was a constant low-grade prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I'd be in my apartment and I'd feel a sudden intense pressure, as if someone had just walked into the room. I'd spin around, my heart pounding, but there was never anyone there. I started seeing things too, flickers of movement at the very edge of my vision, a shadow in a doorway that was a little too tall, a little too dark. When I turned to look, it would be gone. Mark number 4 happened a week later. I was clumsy with grief, not paying attention. I was walking down the stairs to my apartment's lobby. I missed a step and I pitched forward. I remember the sickening weightless lurch, the flash of the hard tile floor rushing up to meet me. I braced for impact, for the crack of bone, but it never came. I just stopped, a foot from the ground, suspended in midair for a split second, as if an invisible, powerful hand had caught me by the chest. Then I was set down gently on my feet. I stood there trembling in the empty, silent stairwell. A saved fall. The 5th and 6th marks came in quick succession, like a 1-2 punch from this invisible force that was now ordering my life. I was about to go get an elevator at a shopping mall when I felt a sudden inexplicable wave of pure dread. A silent internal scream telling me, "Do not get in." I hesitated and let the doors close without me. A moment later, the lights on the floor indicator went dark, and a loud, grinding screech echoed down the elevator shaft, followed by the distant sound of the alarm bell ringing. A warning unheard. That same evening, I was walking home through the park. A large barking dog off its leash came bounding towards me, its teeth bared. I froze, a jolt of pure primal fear shooting through me. The dog was a foot away, ready to leap, when it suddenly stopped. It let out a high-pitched, terrified yelp, tucked its tail between its legs and fled, as if it had seen something standing right behind me. A fear answered. 6 marks in, and my life was no longer my own. I was being guided, protected, manipulated by an unseen, unknowable force. The feeling of being watched was a certainty now. I began to see it more clearly, though never directly. In the reflection of my dark TV screen, I'd see a shape standing in the room behind me. It was tall, stooped like an old man, with arms that were too long, their hands almost touching the floor. In the reflection of a shop window as I walked by, I'd see it, a huge hulking shape, following a few paces behind me, always keeping to the shadows. The 7th and 8th marks brought it closer, from a visual presence to a physical one. I started to notice a strange smell in my apartment, a smell that would come and go without reason. It was a heavy, musky animal scent, the smell of damp, rich earth and something else, something like wet fur, a scent of the old earth. One night I was lying in bed, the lights on, my nerves a raw, jangled mess. I was drifting in that grey space before sleep when I felt something brush against my outstretched hand. It was a coarse, bristly feeling, like touching a thick, wiry animal pelt. I snatched my hand back with a choked cry, my heart exploding in my chest. I was alone in the room. There was nothing there. A touch of cold fur. I was 9 marks in, and the terror was a constant companion now. I knew the 10th mark was coming, and I knew that with it would come the final terrible reveal. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, the waiting or the seeing. The 9th mark came last night. I'd finally managed to fall into a fitful, exhausted sleep. I was woken up by a voice. A low, guttural, wet sound whispered directly into my ear. It wasn't a language I knew, but I felt the meaning of the sound in my bones. It was a word that meant mine. A voice not your own. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of my living room, clutching a baseball bat, watching the shadows waiting for the dawn. Tonight I knew it would end, the final mark. I sat on my couch, the TV off, all the lights in my apartment blazing. The feeling of the presence in the room was overwhelming. It was a physical pressure, a thickness in the air. The musky animal scent was overpowering. I could feel it just there, in the dark hallway that led to my bedroom, waiting. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was a year of grief. Maybe it was weeks of mounting terror. But I was done being scared. I was done being the victim in this ghost story. I needed to see it, and I needed to face it. Okay, I said, my voice shaking, defiant whisper to the empty air. I know you're here. Show yourself. The air in the hallway seemed to shimmer, to darken. A shape began to resolve itself out of the gloom. At first it was the familiar stooped silhouette of an old man. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, even with its hunched posture. Its arms were long, the gnarled, 3-jointed fingers of its hands brushing against the floorboards. Its body was covered in a thick, matted, greasy black fur. And then it lifted its head, and I saw its face. It wasn't a man's face. It was the long, narrow, bearded head of a goat. Its horns were thick and curved, spiralling back from its narrow skull. But the worst part, the part that finally, completely broke my mind, was its eyes. They weren't the dumb, placid eyes of a farm animal. They were a pair of intelligent, ancient, and utterly malevolent yellow eyes. each other for an eternity across the 20 feet of my brightly lit living room, and in its ancient yellow eyes I saw it, the same serene, peaceful, knowing look my mother had on her face when she died. It is my protector, my guardian. It has been with me, a silent, unseen shadow for the past 2 months. It cleared the path for me, it saved me from the fall, it frightened away the dog, and now that I have seen it, it no longer feels the need to hide. I'm writing this now from my desk. The sun has come up, but it has brought no comfort, because it's still here. It's standing in the corner of my room, by the door, its stooped, hairy form a black hole in the morning light. It hasn't moved, it just watches. My mother's final words echo in my head. I've never been afraid. He's always been with me. What do I do? How do you escape a guardian angel? How do you run from a protector that will never ever let any harm come to you, but whose very presence is a fate worse than death? I do not think that that is a guardian angel, but hey, even if it is a demon, still seems to be kind of low-key protecting, so if you can just get used to a scary goat following you around, not a bad deal, I think. The second story comes from Blair Daniels. I'm pretty sure I've read some of their stories before, so go check them out in the description. This story is titled, You Have One New Friend Request. I don't know when Facebook introduced the feature Friend Suggestions. It used to be called, but now it's People You May Know. A bunch of Facebook profiles suggested to you to add as friends, usually people who have a mutual friend with you, or someone you've searched for in the past. What creeps me out is how accurate it is. It's clearly taking data from somewhere, because it suggested people to me that I've only ever interacted with in real life. The woman that cuts my hair, or the guy that does my taxes at HR Block. Sometimes though, it really is a random person that Facebook thinks I know for some reason. And that's what happened on Thursday evening. A new friend suggestion, A.R. Winters. No mutual friends, no apparent connection to me. But this one caught my eye for a few reasons. First, the photo was of a poor quality. It looked like a photo from the 90s, something that had been developed on real film and then scanned or photographed. Second, it had been taken from far away. The man or possibly woman was wearing dark clothing, standing against a tree so far away I couldn't make out their face. It didn't occur to me until just then, but generally profile pictures aren't taken from that far away, unless they're travelling or showing off a landmark. But this person was just leaning against a dead tree. Out of curiosity I clicked their profile. All their info was hidden though. No cover picture, no other profile pictures, no about me info. The next time I loaded Facebook, he wasn't a suggested friend anymore. It was just the usual never-ending wheel of 30-something women that had a smattering of mutual friends with me. So I forgot about it for a few days, until they popped up again. People you may know, A.R. Winters. The same photo of them leaning against the dead tree. Or was it? As I stared at the photo, I realised they were standing straight up, no longer leaning. I could have sworn. I shook my head. They were so far away. How could I tell whether they were leaning on the tree or just standing underneath it? Later that night I checked Facebook again. People you may know, A.R. Winters, one mutual friend. I froze. A mutual friend. The mutual friend was some girl I went to high school with. I didn't know her well. We'd been close in the 8th grade, but then she'd started hanging out with the more popular girls and we lost touch. Still Facebook friends though, because I never went through my list of 2,000 plus people and pruned some off. It didn't say he had a mutual friend with her before, so they just became Facebook friends, like today, this evening. Maybe they're someone from our school, maybe they just joined Facebook for the first time now, or maybe they lost the password to their old account and are creating a new one. A few more days passed and I didn't see A.R. Winters show up in my feed, but then on Saturday night, there they were. People you may know, A.R. Winters, 3 mutual friends. Not 1, 3. And the photo was definitely different. It was still the dead tree, the overcast sky. Everything looked the exact same. Except the person. They weren't against the tree anymore. They'd taken a few steps closer to the photographer. They appeared to be a woman, tall and pale, dressed in a flowy black shirt and long black pants, wavy long dark hair parted neatly on the left side. Because of the film quality, I still couldn't make out their face. Who is she? I glanced at our mutual friends. One was a guy I had chemistry lab with in college, and the other... No. The other was our English teacher, Mrs. Flowers. She'd been the teacher mentor of our literature club, and she'd been dead for 5 years. I sat there staring at the screen, all of it slowly sinking in. Her account can't even accept new friend requests. And why would this random person friend request her anyway? A horrible creeping dread tugged at the back of my mind. I clicked on the other 2 mutual friends, Jessica Marie and Michael, scrolled down their timelines and they'd also passed away. There hadn't been any official announcement for either, but their timelines were scattered with messages like, I miss you, and 2 years since you've been here. Quick Google searches showed that Jessica Marie died in 2020 from complications of COVID, and Michael had died in 2023 in a motorcycle accident. I clicked back to my feed to the friend suggestions to AR's profile. I froze. She was standing closer. Much closer. Her face was pale, almost pure white, like all the blood had been sucked out of it. Her eyes were dark, pupil and iris indistinguishable, and they seemed to be too big for her eyes. She had no eyebrows. Her long dark hair twisted around her as if there was a terrible wind. Blip. I jumped. There was a little red one over the bell icon. A.R. Winters sent you a friend request. My hands began to shake. I stared at the 2 buttons. Confirm. Cancel. I clicked cancel, closed out the window and slammed the laptop shut. I sat there in the dark, panting. Sweat covered my arms. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Calm down, it's obviously just some stupid prank. The photo's probably not even real. AI. I pushed out a breath and got up, put on my hoodie, left the apartment and went for a walk. I shoved my hands in my pockets and walked along the walking trail at the local park. My breath came out in clouds of mist. I shivered. It was almost dusk, and the street lamps glowed across the road, orange amber. Then I stopped. I'd never noticed it before. At the edge of the park visible in the dying light, but I knew it was her. I knew. I ran back home, locked my apartment door, and opened the laptop, went to Facebook. A.R. Winter sent you a friend request. The profile photo. Her face filled the entire photo, right up against the screen, like she was staring right at me. And maybe it's just the stress, but I feel sick. Really sick. I've thrown up twice in the past half hour. My stomach hurts so much more than I ever remember it hurting before. And I can't help but think, am I next? Damn. That was good. That was creepy. Someone's replied saying, I think she just wants to talk to you about your car's extended warranty. But yeah, that was a creepy one for sure. Our third story comes from Egan Growlergy, and it's called We Used to Share Creepy Stories Around the Campfire. The last one I heard might have ruined my life. I wish I could just cut straight to the chase, but I feel like I should at the very least make an attempt to include some sort of context. Otherwise, what's the point? I'll try my best to keep it brief. During my college years, our core group of friends made it an annual tradition to go out camping for a few days at a time. Not very original, I know, but it was mostly just an excuse to hang out away from everyone and everything else. We weren't nature enthusiasts or anything of the sort, but it's something we didn't mind doing as a group. The roster wasn't always the same every single year. Exes would come and go, exams or personal matters would keep some of us from joining, and sometimes trivial arguments also resulted in a few phases being a no-show. And yet somehow, a handful of us always managed to pull through. Brenda, Michael and Lillian, Dennis, Margot and myself. It definitely became harder to schedule things once we all graduated, but we made it work. The only thing that managed to mess up our annual camping streak was the pandemic a few years ago. And after that it sort of became easier for people to come up with excuses for not being able to make it. We still chatted semi-regularly and hung out from time to time, but that was it. But this year it was different. Either the stars aligned themselves, or maybe we'd all gotten to a point in our adult lives where we were starting to feel some serious nostalgia for simpler times that aren't that far back into the past, even though there are days where it definitely feels like it. So the six of us marked down the dates on our calendars, and we made it happen. 2 days, 2 nights. Seems simple enough, just as it used to be. We never really pre-planned any special activities, unless there was some specific points of interest near the area worth checking out or whatever. But one thing we always did was tell scary stories around the campfire on the first night. Sometimes during the second night as well, if some of us were feeling particularly inspired. To be honest, I don't think any of us ever really managed to truly scare anyone with our stories. Some of us, myself included, would try really hard, but more often than not, what we thought was scary turned out to be just an uneven mix of funny, illogical and campy elements poorly strewn together. Light on goosebumps, but great for laughs, which wasn't all that bad. This year it was different, and as you might have guessed from the title of this post, I'm currently typing all this out due to what happened on that first night. But before I get to it, there's one more thing I need to mention. As far as I, Brenda, Michael, Lillian and Margot were concerned, this trip had been planned with only 6 people in mind. But when Dennis finally rolled up to our meeting spot, late as usual, we were all taken aback by the fact that he had brought an extra person with him. never mentioned in passing to anyone, and who, by the looks of it, was apparently tagging along for the entirety of our get-together out in the woods. Her name was Liz. Now, if this had happened during our college years, I can imagine how this could have been a lot more awkward. Having a random person intruding in our group and potentially ruining the solid, pre-established dynamic between us. But we're not kids anymore, and more importantly, we simply aren't as up-to-date as we used to be when it comes to each other's personal lives. Not that it's any excuse to not let the rest of us know that, oh, by the way, I'm bringing someone you've never met before, please be cool. But I think the rest of the group quickly got over it, because they seldom get the opportunity to meet new people, and seeing as this is Dennis we're talking about, I think the gang just instinctively made the decision to try and make Liz feel as welcome and included as possible. Maybe I would have felt the same if it weren't for one thing. I talked to Dennis on the phone the night before about the trip and some other pointless stuff that's not even worth bringing up. And not only did he never hint at this Liz person or anyone else coming along, but he also sounded perfectly normal. But the Dennis we met on that day seemed a little cagey and distraught to me. Maybe he was embarrassed by the whole ordeal, to a point where he could hardly look me or anyone else in the eyes. Maybe his girlfriend, if that's what she was, had forced him to invite her against his will or something. Something about it felt weird to me, but I kept it to myself, figuring it would be in everyone's best interest, especially Dennis's, to avoid asking uncomfortable questions and stirring unnecessary drama, which is the one thing we always try to leave out of these trips. We made some small talk, a quick inventory check to make sure we weren't missing any essentials, and then proceeded to walk on foot for a couple of hours or so before reaching a decent enough spot where we set up our tents right before nightfall. Here's what happened next. After getting a decent fire going and pouring ourselves a few drinks, we figured the time had come to sit down and once again take turns sharing some creepy stories, just like we used to. I don't think everyone was particularly enthused by the idea. Maybe they felt like they'd grown out of it. Still, you could tell everyone made an effort, to varying degrees, to humour one of the very few traditions that our group somehow managed to keep alive after all these years. Even if the stories turn out to be awful, maybe they could still work as an icebreaker of sorts to help Liz better acclimate to the group. Margot, sat on my left, went first. She recounted a mildly unsettling incident that happened to a friend of hers, who was the victim of a stalker for a couple of months after their initial interactions through dating apps fell through. Last she heard, an arrest had been made, but as the story didn't really bring anything new to the table, just some guy being a creep, the usual. Then came Brenda's turn, who was sitting to the left of Margot. She pretty much offered a recap of a film she thought was obscure enough for the rest of us to not pick up on. Something that prompted Michael, the hardcore horror enthusiast of the group, to lightly grill her over once she was done. I remembered a time when calling her out in a similar fashion would have made her pack her things on the spot and leave. And for a second I worried that Michael's harmless jab might have been sufficient to ruin the mood, if not the entire weekend. To my surprise, Brenda chuckled, raised her glass of gin and tonic in the air and said, "Alright, you got me," before downing her drink, pretending like that was an actual punishment for her deception. "Why don't you go next then? Let's see what you got, nerd," she playfully said. Michael, who sat to my right, grinned as he straightened himself and rolled up his sleeves, as he was the type of person to never waste an opportunity to terrorise his friends, especially when he had their full attention and their consent to do so. Before he could proceed with whatever demented story he had cooked up just for the occasion, Dennis chimed in. "Actually, would you mind if she goes first?" he asked, without either looking at Michael or motioning for someone in particular, although we naturally inferred he meant Liz. She's got something she needs to share with everyone. Michael grimaced before quickly shooting back an "okay, sure," but even though I could tell he was slightly bummed for having the spotlight snatched away from him, the way Dennis had worded his request definitely got Michael and everyone else's attention. Before I continue and just to help me visualise this setting, this is how we were all seated in relation to each other. Clockwise and starting from the top, you had Liz, who was sat right across from me, Dennis to her left, then Lillian, Michael, myself, Margot, and finally Brenda. "Let's hear this story then," Michael said, almost in a challenging tone, which prompted Lillian to tug at his shirt and shoot him a look. Liz shook her head as soon as she heard his words, her eyes fixated on the crackling fire pit between myself and her. "It's not a story. It's a dream I had. Or nightmare rather, I guess. Hope that's alright." Michael looked at me and rolled his eyes, upset that she could use the dream excuse to make up as many horrifying details as she wanted just to spice up her own tale. Sensing his reaction, Lillian elbowed him gently as a reminder to not be a dick. Everyone else gave her the okay in a heartbeat, but you could tell the mood had shifted a little, no doubt in response to Liz's serious demeanour, as well as the prospect that she could be on the verge of unloading some very personal things to a group of strangers, instead of sharing a simple, silly, scary story. She took a deep breath and began, "There's this scream, but it's a scream unlike any I've heard in my life. I know deep down that it's coming from someone, somewhere nearby, but there's something just really off and absolutely terrifying about it." She crossed her arms and squeezed them for comfort, her eyes still glued to the fire, as if looking for the right words within its flames to help her illustrate her nightmare. "I've never heard anything like it in real life, or in any movies or games or whatever. It's not really calling for help, it's just a visceral cry of pure horror and pain. The reason it terrifies me to my core is because my mind can't even begin to imagine what could be causing this indescribable amount of agony. And the sound." She raised her hands and placed them on her face, briefly covering most of her features except her eyes. "It's so loud that it rattles my bones, and it doesn't stop, it just keeps going, and I'm just frozen in place, unsure of what to do. I know this person needs help, but I can't find the courage to go look for them because I'm afraid of what I'll find. Afraid I'll see a scene so horrible my own brain won't be able to rationalise. I'm so afraid and so sick to my stomach, more than I've ever been in my entire life, of finding out what's causing that scream. But the more it goes on," she began to shake her head very slightly. "The more it goes on, the more I start to wonder how it can possibly still be going. I know that it's a dream, but something about it feels real. And it doesn't make sense to me that this person hasn't died yet, or at the very least passed out or destroyed their vocal cords from such a prolonged pained cry caused by whatever is being done to them. And I think that's when it hits me." She paused for a few seconds, her lips quivering. "Maybe it's not a person at all. Maybe something's trying to lure me in by mimicking the exaggerated sounds of someone in need. Or maybe it really is a person whose impossible pain is being inflicted at the hands of someone or something." it seemed like she was actually getting teary. I know she said this was a dream, but I didn't think anyone present was actually buying her story, though it was hard to ignore her commitment to the bit and how palpable her emotions felt. She continued, so I decided to go look for the source of the scream. I can't really explain it, but it's like a switch is flipped in my brain. It's just something I know I have to do, something I'm supposed to do. Maybe I've finally fallen for its spell and I'm being led to my demise, or maybe something in me decided that at the very least. I should check to see if someone needed my help, or maybe morbid curiosity simply won over. Maybe a combination of those options seems more likely since I'm really not that good of a person. The corner of her mouth slightly twisted itself into a smirk, but I don't think anyone else caught it, as she quickly pressed on. So I started walking through the woods. It's night time and I can barely see anything, to a point where I think to myself that I won't actually be able to get anywhere. It's comforting though. It's a comforting thought, as much as I hate to admit it, because it would mean that I wouldn't have to face whatever's out there all on my own. And then I realised that I don't really need to see. Not when that goddamn scream seems to be pulling me towards it, growing ever louder whenever I happen to take one more step towards its direction. Next thing I know, I've arrived at a clearing, and there's a small black cabin in front of me. The door is wide open, or rather broken off its hinges, as if whatever's inside has been waiting for me all this time. And even though it's very dark out, I can tell that not a single window has any glass panes in it. Whether they were smashed before my arrival or never there to begin with, I don't know, but I don't like it. Why? Lillian asked in a low, hushed tone, a clear indicator that she was genuinely terrified by what she was hearing, as if the way she was latching onto Michael wasn't enough of a giveaway. Liz didn't seem bothered by what was, surprisingly, the first interjection someone had made since she'd started recounting her nightmare. In fact, she was so unbothered and unsurprised that her vacant stare didn't even meet Lillian's, not even for a brief second just to acknowledge her. Because the door is wide open and the windows aren't shut, whatever's happening inside, whoever is responsible wants me to know that they have all the power, all of the control, and that there's no escape from what looks to be, at first glance, such an unguarded cabin with no one in it. I know that I could be walking into a trap. I know that I won't be able to leave from the moment I step inside. And I know that I could be moments away from seeing or experiencing pain and suffering on a level that shouldn't be possible. But I've come this far, and the other thing is that the scream has become so impossibly and unbearably loud the closer I got to the cabin that I just wanted to stop, no matter what it takes. Even if it means I have to walk in and take its place. A part of me is very much against the idea of proceeding, but my body continues to move all on its own, because it too knows that all of this has to stop, and that it won't stop until I see this thing to the end, whatever this is. So I walk in, and something happens the moment my foot crosses the entrance's threshold. She paused. That ungodly, piercing sound just disappears, like that. She snapped her fingers. Like something just erased it from existence, gone without a trace, not even leaving a single echo behind. I should feel relieved, but the deafening silence that replaced it might honestly be even worse. It's so heavy, and so absolute that I thought my own hearing might have been taken away as well, either by the scream or by whatever snuffed it out. It's bad either way, because deep in my gut I know that whatever's inside the house knows that I'm here, and cancelling out all other sounds is its sick way of rolling out the red carpet just for me. I know I should just leave, and I probably could if I wanted to. When I turn around, the door's still there, open, letting a very faint breeze in. I even take a step towards it, and realise no unseen force is keeping me in this place. I could just go and disappear into the night. So why don't you? Margot asked. Liz shrugged. Maybe the screams would return, although I don't think they would. Then why? Margot insisted, visibly upset that someone who wasn't even her friend would put herself in danger in a scenario that wasn't even real to begin with. Because I need to know what brought me to this place, and for what purpose. I need to know what happened here, don't you? No one answered. I scanned everyone's faces as best I could. The girls were evidently terrified, while Michael was so absorbed and leaning forward that it's a miracle he hadn't fallen face first into the fire pit. Dennis, on the other hand, barely seemed like he was there or paying any attention. The fact of the matter is, most of us were invested in her story by this point, so it's only natural that we wanted to see it through. Hell, I would have been the first to laugh my arse off if it had been leading up to a terrible joke, or she hit us with a to be continued before revealing to us that she's a screenwriter who's still fleshing out the story. If only. Okay, so you walked in and, Michael said, eager for Liz to continue and completely oblivious to how unsettled his own girlfriend was by his side. Liz didn't seem to care either. I walk in, and I know deep down that nothing can prepare me for whatever's waiting for me inside. I keep on walking until I reach the entrance to the only room that seems to have a faint source of light coming from it. There aren't any doors in this house, but I don't bother peering into any of the other pitch-black rooms because I know there's nothing there. The room with the light is the one where I'm awaited. I keep my eyes glued to the floor, wanting to delay facing the inevitable for as long as possible. I can't make out anything other than my feet and the old wet floorboard, but I can feel it in the air. There's something's in there with me. Maybe just out of my field of vision, waiting for me to look up and finally acknowledge it. She paused, and no one dared to make a sound. And then I looked, and before I could even begin to process what I was seeing, before I could let out a scream or react in any way, I felt my mind shatter and crumble almost immediately from whatever it was that I saw and smelled in that room. I can't really describe the scene to you, only my primal sense of revulsion which scrubbed off those impossibly abominable and unspeakable images from the very fabric of my being. But some traces remain. She lowered her head, looking down at her lap. If I try real hard, I can see the room and feel on some level that I know what's in there and that I know what happened, but I can't bring myself to put it into actual words. The mere thought of attempting to do so feels like the most depraved thing a normal person could ever think of doing, and it sickens me. She gently rubbed her face, but I couldn't tell whether she was actually wiping tears. I thought she was done, but she kept going. But there's one thing I remember, one detail I can still see even now clear as day. Everyone prays for the impact of what should be the final reveal, or twist, or whatever. Liz proceeded, only this time with a stare that seemed strangely vacant and utterly There's a man in the room. I can see his face, and his abhorrent expression is all I need to know that he's the one responsible for whatever horrors took place inside the cabin. He's the one who caused all that impossible screaming. He's the one who made me come all the way out here for some sinister reason. And I know who he is. I recognize him. She paused again, having become slightly more agitated over the course of this last stretch of her story. I don't know if I felt sorry for her and wanted for her to just be done with it for her own sake, or I'd grown impatient with how she seemed to be edging us. Either way, I blurted out, "Who is it?" and she immediately shot me a piercing look. I'm not sure if this was the first time she actually looked at someone directly from the moment she began telling us her story, but something about the unrelenting intensity in her unwavering, unexpected stare made me deeply uneasy. A small gust of wind blew in, putting the dying fire out its misery. "It's you," she said, with a voice that trembled not with fear, but with a profound, venomous ire. My stomach dropped, and I felt my entire body suddenly become coated in cold sweat. "It's you," she repeated, with an increased level of repulsion that only I, the person on the receiving end of such vile and imaginary accusations, could perceive. One by one, everyone else slowly turned their heads towards me. For a moment I genuinely thought that, surely, one of them was bound to break character sooner or later, and burst out laughing about how they had succeeded in both creeping me out and pranking me. But no one said a word, and I couldn't even think of anything to say as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. We just sat there in silence. Margot eventually got up and said she was going to sleep, which prompted everyone else but Liz to do the same. When Brenda asked Liz if she was okay, she said that she was, but that she'd stay put for a little longer before going into her own tent. They all just left the two of us there without addressing me directly or commenting on Liz's dream and my own involvement in it. According to her, even without the fire between us as a light source, I could tell that her gaze was still fixed on me. The more I tried to make sense of this situation, the angrier I got, but I tried to not let it show. Why would they go through all this trouble to make me feel like shit, and even recruit the help of someone none of us really know, just to make me feel even more uncomfortable? I understand wanting to pull a prank, but this was beyond anything anyone from our group ever thought of pulling. This was on a whole other level. Why would they do this to me? And how could every single person in our group go along with it with such a straight face? I was angry, yes, but also deeply hurt by the insensitivity and senselessness of it all. But I didn't say a single word. If that's what they wanted, I wouldn't be giving them the satisfaction so easily. I briefly stared back at Liz, who still sat on her end of the makeshift log benches we hastily put together, looking right back at me. She had nothing else to say, and neither did I, so I got up and went back to my own tent without saying a word. For all I know, she sat there for the entire night. I'm not sure if I actually got any sleep, because by the time I came to, I was still as furious as the night before. It was almost 10 AM when I checked my phone. We hadn't agreed on a set hour to wake up or anything. Usually we just allowed ourselves to sleep in for as long as we wanted. Then we'd cook breakfast or lunch, depending on the time of day, and eat the meal before carrying on with our loose schedule. I couldn't hear any kind of noise outside, which got me thinking I was probably the first person to wake up. I figured I might as well go for a morning walk in an attempt to clear my thoughts, knowing it probably wouldn't be of much help. When I unzipped my tent to step outside, my suddenly stopped with the scene I was met with, and for the second day in a row I was at a loss for words. Not only was everyone else already up and about, they were all just standing there with their gear and bags fully packed and ready to go. I don't know what bothered me the most, the fact that they were all somehow got up, got dressed and packed their things without me taking notice, or that they were all just standing there, silently staring me down and sort of visibly annoyed, as if they'd all been waiting for ages for me to do the same. With the exception of Liz, who stood the furthest away from my tent, everyone else was facing my direction. "Yeah?" I asked, with my head poking outside my tent. "We're going somewhere," Michael said. "Yeah," I added, frustrated, but also hoping to elicit a similar response from any of them. "Yes," Lillian said. "We're just waiting on you." "Cool," I said. "You can wait." I zipped up my tent and tried to gather my thoughts before actually starting to pack my things. They weren't chatting outside or making small talk of any kind from what I could hear, but I did get the feeling that they were circling me, as if wanting to ensure that I wouldn't be making a sneaky exit of some sort without them noticing. Maybe it was just my imagination, but if they were hell-bent on keeping up the charade, so would I. So, I welcomed that awkwardness and did what I could to prolong it, because I wanted to make them feel as uncomfortable as I was. They didn't seem fazed, but Duke can play at that game and I'm not one to quit. Once I strapped my backpack on, I slapped the side of my legs to let them know I was ready to go. Liz briefly looked in my direction without actually meeting my eyes this time, and then she started walking. One by one the others turned away from me and began following her steps without a word. About a further 30 minutes of walking, I removed my backpack and sat down on a nearby overgrown tree stump, not giving a rat's ass as to whether everyone else would just keep on walking without me. Whenever I stopped to drink some water or tie my shoelaces, they would also stop seemingly in unison. Much to my dismay, they immediately altered their pace and turned towards me, some facing me completely, others side-eyeing me, all but Liz, who kept her back towards. I let out a small scoff, inaudible to anyone else but me, and I chuckled. I rubbed my hands together, stretched my legs, then reached into my bag for some snacks, which I ate without a single care in the world. I was delighted not by their taste, but by how much my actions were likely pissing them off to some extent. I gave no signs that I'd be getting up on my feet any time soon to proceed with the hike, and after 10 minutes or so of me slowly stuffing my face, I was almost convinced that they just waited out in silence. But I was wrong. Brenda, the one closest to me, spoke up. "You can do that later," she said. I didn't look at her. Instead, I slowly, loudly crumbled in my hand the foil packaging of the snack bars I'd just eaten, and after putting them away somewhere in my backpack so as to not litter, I brought my right hand up and cupped my ear towards her, pretending I didn't hear what she said. A long pause followed. I said, "You can do that later." "Where? When?" No answer from her or anyone. I shrugged and pulled out another protein bar, and for the first time since we left our camp, I sensed actual hostility coming from the people I thought were my friends. Before I could tear up the package, I noticed that Dennis had started walking back towards me, and I didn't realise until after the fact that my hand instinctively went for the pocket knife I kept in one of my front pockets. I was already on my feet by the time he reached me. "We have to go." "Go? Where?" I shot back, loudly enunciating each word his face. Brenda, Margot, Michael and Lillian took a noticeable step towards me. I'd done my due diligence a few days prior to the trip and looked up what sort of hiking trails and other points of interest might exist in the area. Because I knew no one ever bothered to really look at those things in depth. I always did my homework more out of curiosity than anything else, because I figured it would be cool to actually have places to visit, and to be the one that actually found them for the rest of us. But whatever path Liz had us walking on wasn't one I was familiar with. Even after looking at the handful of screenshots I'd saved on my phone, I still couldn't tell where we could possibly be headed. This was all no doubt part of their big prank, whatever it entailed, but I was done playing along. Whatever this was, it wasn't worth the time, or the effort, or the incessant gnawing sensation I had in the pit of my stomach. They took another step. "We're almost there," Dennis whispered, as his warm morning breath filled up my nostrils. "You will see." "Nah," I said. I looked into his eyes and could swear that he was just about to take a swing at me. But before I could take any measure to protect myself, a sudden, loud noise completely derailed my train of thought. At first I thought one of them had tripped over and hurt themselves as they were making their way towards me. But one quick look at the rest of the group and I could tell they weren't the ones making that sound. That awful, distant sound of someone screaming as if their guts were slowly being pulled out while the soles of their feet were set ablaze. Liz's story and all of its eerie details immediately flooded my mind. I don't know how they pulled it off, or how many more people they got to tag along, but I couldn't stand how it was making me feel. I wanted to shout at them just to turn it off, but that god-awful scream sounded so real, so desperate and so loud that I could barely form a coherent thought. Not one of them seemed bothered or distressed by it, and I could just tell from the way my insides were doing backflips, and the way my own brain was firing off all sorts of signals, that what I was hearing couldn't possibly be a recording. It was real. "Someone needs our help. We have to go," Margot said. I looked at her, someone I thought I knew for a number of years, but I didn't recognise her or any of them. Not really, not completely, not anymore. I then looked at Liz, who remained distant enough from where I stood that I couldn't quite make out her features. I'm not entirely sure what happened next, but I remember bolting in the opposite direction. I didn't even think of grabbing my backpack. I just ran out of there as fast as I could. I must have looked back a single time as soon as I took off, and I noticed that for some strange reason none of them had been pursuing me. They all just stood exactly where I left them, but the same thing couldn't be said for the scream, which loudly threatened to follow me to the ends of the earth. My body was on autopilot while my brain kept thinking of the worst possible stuff that could happen to me in the middle of nowhere if for some reason I couldn't find my way back. I ran until my legs almost gave out, and by that point I was nearly out of the woods. The sky was clear, my phone was still working, and I was finally starting to recognise some local landmarks. And while my ears were still loudly buzzing, the scream itself dissipated at some point without me noticing. Despite being mentally scarred, I was physically unarmed. I reached the parking lot where we had left our cars, and after briefly inspecting everyone else's rides from the outside, especially the one that belonged to Dennis, which Liz also rode in, I got in my car and drove home. I held my phone in my hand during the entire drive, hoping for a text message or a call from any of them that could let me know they really did get me. But none ever came. Not a single one. I have, however, gotten calls and texts from friends and relatives. They have haven't heard from them, and their respective places of employment are also inquiring about their unplanned and prolonged absence. I wanted to believe that they were all in on it as well for whatever reason, but I know that can't possibly be true. I've had to deal with a number of calls from concerned parents, some of which I've actually known for a number of years and met in person a few times. And there's a kind of genuine parental concern that you just can't fake. I didn't really know what to say or how to explain what had happened, so we either said something had come up and I had to leave early, or that they had decided to prolong their trip in a way that didn't really suit me. I don't think anything I said constitutes a lie, but I know how bad this looks, and I know it's only a matter of time until law enforcement gets involved. I've barely slept since I got back, and to say that I'm scared shitless of what might happen next to me would be an understatement. I'm sorry if this all sounds insensitive, but I know I did nothing wrong. I've reread everything I wrote here a couple of times, and I know for a fact that's how everything went down. I wish that whatever happened during that night didn't happen, but it did. And right now I can't afford to be worrying about anyone else but me. 6 people are gone, or at the very least, they have yet to show any signs of life. Their phones are still on from what I've been told, but no one is picking up any of the calls. When asked if I'd tried contacting them myself, I lied and said that I had. When in reality that's the last thing I want to do, because something tells me they would pick up my calls. The exchange I had with Dennis's mother was by far the most unnerving, because when I told her about his friend Liz that he had brought along with him, she said this was the first time she was hearing that name. Furthermore, his mother actually visited him the day before. She baked some goods for him to bring for everyone, and spent the night at his place before seeing him off the next morning when he came to meet us. And never at any point was there a young woman riding in his car, or a mention that he'd be picking someone else along the way. I've known Dennis and his mother a long time, and I know they've always been very open with each other about everything, especially after his father passed unexpectedly from a very aggressive illness a few years ago. So who was this Liz? Where did Dennis pick her up, and why? What did she want, or what did she hope to achieve, and why was I her target? I don't have the answers to those questions at this time, but my mind keeps drifting back to that weird story she told us, and for the worst possible reason too. You see, I doze off every now and then, never enough to a point where I feel like I've actually rested for a bit, but long enough to find myself in some dark woods all alone, while a distant shrill rolls in with the wind and becomes clearer and louder the longer it takes for me to wake up. A black cabin with no doors on its hinges and no glass panes in its windows is the last thing I always see before I wake up. I'm terrified of what else I might hear in that dream, terrified of the things I might see that I cannot comprehend. I lie down on my bed and I think back to the last thing Dennis said to me. You will see. And I find myself swept away by a wave of pure abject horror, as I come to fully realise the inescapable nature of his words. It wasn't a statement, but a promise. Damn. That was really creepy. That was really good. I almost would love a part 2. I feel like you could really expand on it. I would really like to know who is Liz. Is she some kind of like witch or demon or something? I don't know, but man, that was creepy. Or maybe Liz knows something that he's done, that the narrator's done.